It's now 17 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. I'm Kimberly D'Souza, and this is the Now Morning Show. Now, there has been a spate of incidents of school violence since school reopened for all levels last week, beginning on Tuesday, April 19th. Now, many are calling for the Ministry of Education to intervene, and the minister has assured that an interministerial committee will take place to deal with the issue. But we wanted to go a bit deeper to determine what can cause children to act out this way. So with me, I have clinical therapist and clinical traumatologist, Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin, who will be discussing this very topic. Mr. Benjamin, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on Now.
It's a pleasure, Kimberly, to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we really had to bring you in. I mean, since school opened last week on Tuesday, according to the ministry, at least 15 schools have been affected by this school violence. But people have been saying there has been an increase. Maybe we are seeing something new. Is this a new phenomenon?
It is not. It is not. It is not. And I'm quite confused as to why we are confused as to what's going on. Because this is not the first time that we are speaking about school violence in any real sense. I mean, I went to a school where violence was the order of the day. And while I'm 25 years for life, it would have been some time ago. And so I saw brutal fight, including death. And so to hear about, people are concerned, what my concern is really is what did the pandemic do in relation to what we are seeing today. And so we must pay attention. And to me, we never seem to be asking the correct questions. And the very first question, Kimberly, is why? Why are we seeing what we're seeing? We cannot, Kimberly, have a society that is so violent, but yet want our children to be non-violent. We cannot have a country where seemingly there are no real role models to follow, but we want our children to walk on a narrow line.
Now, Mr. Benjamin, before you continue, I know that you want to bring up the pandemic and, of course, the causes, but people are saying it's not just what it may be seen as an increase, but they're talking about the violent behavior towards authority, because you have been hearing about children picking up chairs and launching it at teachers and that sort of thing, and so they're wondering, like, this level of disrespect was not around when they were in school. So is that a new thing?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I was in a school where the principal was on the stage and students decided to pelt ice at her and she was bleeding. I was in a school, in primary school, where a teacher was busted his head open from a parent and a child with a chair. School violence has been around. The violence have been there. But you are quite right. The intensity is frightening. And that is what I'm saying. We're not asking the correct questions. And we must ask the question, why is the intensity what it is? But when you do a scan of our society, look at the crimes, look at the way there's no more night time. We used to be afraid of night, but now broad daylight in the middle of the day without mask, you are being killed. Look at what is going on in our society. We cannot fix our schools unless and until we fix our society. And when I say our society, I mean our homes, our churches, our businesses. We cannot. So if we want to really tackle violence in school, we must pay attention to violence in society. And until we do that, we're spinning top like we have been doing for many years. And while I applaud the interministerial approach, and I think it is great, however, they are going to say the same thing that they were saying for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Because if we are not looking at one, we will never address the other. And further, if we don't look at the last 2 years in the mix, then we will continue to spin.
Now, when you talk about the last 2 years, are you talking about the fact that they have been maybe out of school and cooped up? I mean, are we also talking about their exposure to online now? Because it went into overdrive these past few years. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of, cyberbullying and what they would have been exposed to, how is that, exposed there?
Thank you, Kimberly, for starting there. Violence was there before the pandemic. Then we had the pandemic where children were, as you said, cooped up. Nobody took into account their coping mechanism. Schools are a safe place for children. So even if I'm getting abused in the night or whatever, I used to run away in the day at least for a couple hours and be safe enough. But when a child had to be in there, no fault of their own or anybody, they were exposed to domestic violence, to hunger, to all manner of societal ills. And they had to treat with that. And then we never took into account that they were suffering as well, including the ability to do online work. I am seeing students who never engage with mental health treatment now engage with mental health treatment and on medication, right? And so when you have all of that combined with online bullying. So we had online bullying before, but when everybody went online, it exacerbated. And therefore, this was just in waiting till I see you in real life. And you notice in the first week of school, what we've had, this is all beef. This is all beef that was brewing online for 2 years that nobody addressed. No one addressed. And one of the things that is really perplexing to me is because I've been saying before we bring our students out, we must prepare our teachers differently. We must prepare our students differently. We must prepare our parents differently. We can't just bring them out. While I have been advocating, let's get them out, we had to do it from a psychosocial, mental health, behavioral development perspective. Because behavior would have changed over the last 2 years. And now we expect them to just jump back in and say, hey, we continue, that's normal.
But Mr. Benjamin, the ministry can make the argument that they have school social workers on board and they have them in school to help them with that transition.
And I would say, while that is a fact, what is also a fact is that student support services has been understaffed for the last, probably since its inception. And one of my recommendations has always been, with the amount of social workers out there, as you know, I'm the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Social Workers Association as well, the amount of social workers that is churned out from all the university, every school should have a social worker, a psychologist, or probably a psychologist for 2 schools, and a guidance counselor, every single school. And if we don't do that, then we don't care about the children. Because the issues that I have seen, where you see a child today, and the next time you can reasonably see that child is 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks down the line, that is inadequate in any measure. And therefore, while they can argue, yes, you have social workers, my thing is, if you care about children, if you care about their well-being, put a social worker in every single school and let them work. I have said also, Kimberly, that in these 2 months, even before they came out, the focus should not be on any academia. The focus should be on psychosocial development, mental development, to re-engage students into the new way of school, to re-engage students, because you will understand the way the child brains operate. They, in 2 years, would have solidified a new way. That is how their brain is malleable. And so now they would have already been set. And now to come back out, we have to recalibrate that. And we have not been doing that in any real sense. Yes, the ministry have had a program here, a program there, but I am speaking about a sustained everyday program with your social workers. Social workers should be busy up and down that school every day, having sessions all day. But we're not having that because we don't have the manpower to do it. And we're hearing that. And while they're saying they don't have the manpower, we have social workers working KFC, working taxi, working secretarial duties. And I'm not saying nothing wrong with that. But let us put our children first in the real sense. Not just by saying we have but in a real way. And once we begin to do these things, you will see that the very thing that we are struggling with will be reduced.
Now, Mr. Benjamin, you are talking about, the mental health issue and recalibrating what they would have learned over 2 years. Now, one of the responses to that, at least from the ministry's angle, is the community policing, or the community police that they want to put in these schools. Now, what the minister was saying is that there have been repeat offenders in certain schools, and so they want to put the community police in those schools as a way to deter the violence before it even begins. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
I have a different view. Again, community police is critical and they should have a part to play in our schools. But how the part is being played is going to be critical. I do not believe that we should be labeling any school or segregating or pulling out any school in terms of students. Every single school has issues. Every single school. Whether school have issues of violence or suicidality, because you see, crisis is both implosive and explosive. So while we pay attention to the explosion, which is what we see, the violence, the fighting, we have students who are dealing with severe depression and anxiety, suffering inside. And so we have to be holistic in our approach, and community policing must be part of that multi-systemic approach. And so until we understand that, then the community police, they will go and get frustrated. because they're going to be working by themselves, and police, they don't have the wherewithal to deal with the mental health. And so when they see something off key and they call on the social worker, oh God, let me see when I could fit it in. And if you have one social worker to 7 schools, almost 3,000 students to one social worker, when and how? And so the poor police and them go get frustrated too. And so what I think should be happening here is you look at a multi-systemic approach, and you get teams within the system, and that team work together. You have a social worker, more likely than not, who could be a case manager, and you manage a system where you have all the key players with different roles and responsibilities, because you are tapping into the disciplinary part, because I don't want people to feel like we're not going to deal with the disciplinary part. We're tackling into the psychosocial part, we're tackling into the educational part, the psychological part, the parent development part. Because a lot of parents also, while we think that they should be the first line, I don't believe in that, that Harold Abos taught us that in sociology. Because a child spends 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 1,000 hours a year with somebody else than a mother or father. So mother and father cannot, in my view, be any primary source of anything. We have to be the primary source for our children's development.
When you say we, you mean the institution as the school?
The school, the home, the church, Mandy, mosque, everybody, because the child is part of an ecological model. And the ecological model surrounds this child. And so the child takes their cues from everybody. Kimberly, the first thing you wanted to be when you were growing up is something that you learned from that school system. The first person you wanted to emulate was a teacher or somebody, and emulate either good or bad. The way you learn and experience life was based on whether you had a teacher who encouraged you or discouraged you. That is the fundamental aspect. And so in my view, while community policing is good, community police cannot work alone. Community police cannot work. Psychologists cannot work alone. Social workers cannot work alone.
But what about the family? Because some people say charity begins at home. And so when they're seeing these indiscipline in the children, they're wondering what is going on in that home setting.
And there's a responsibility for home. But even if charity begins at home and you have nothing to give, then we're still without. And so we have to strengthen the family in order to help the child. We keep believing that a family knows, a mother knows, a father knows what to do. And while that is their responsibility in law, sometimes we have to teach them. It's the same point I make for sexual education, and people always want to fight me on that. To me, if a parent has lived a difficult sexual life, can they teach a child that? And if we say that they are the ones responsible, then what exactly are we teaching the child? Yeah. If the family is violent, then what are we doing? And that is why I'm talking about a multi-pronged approach. And this is where the what you said, the ministerial approach, is also critical.
Yes.
Because then once you get a child, rather than have to wait so long to go through social development, to go through family services, if you have everybody combined, then it is easy to move children or family along to get them the help.
Now, Mr. Benjamin, I want to get your thoughts quickly on the filming and sharing of these school fights. Because a lot of people say by doing that, you're perpetrating the action, you're almost giving it validity, and you're encouraging more school fights to happen. Is that true?
We cannot get away from that. You see, again, we have to understand we are operating in a technologically advanced world, and our children are more advanced. In our days, what we had was 100 students surrounding the fight. That was the social media at that point. And that would have given legs in terms of they will talk about it every day. And so the fight continued to live for a couple of days because you had the chain up, people with the basket, boy, But today now, that has moved to the online world like everything else. And in managing that circumstances back then, we also have to manage what is now. We cannot get away from that. And so we focus on the wrong thing. Again, that is the end result. Let us focus on the why and the beginning. And once we do that, then we will see that those other things will change. But again, we only concentrate on the social media because we see that. What about how many fights are happening today that we do not see? And until we understand the holistic approach, including social media, we spin on top.
I wanted to know as well the effects that or how domestic violence played out, or violence played out locally, has been affecting what we're seeing in schools.
No, domestic violence, again, has been a part of, unfortunately, families for a very long time, and has been affecting students also. And the interesting point you raise here, and you raise it in your previous interview, and again, we do not have the data to support, but anecdotally, and a person who work with family every day, you saw where violence in the home, not just domestic violence, but violence in general, created an even greater challenge for children. I saw a lot of parent-child difficult relationship. I saw a lot of crumbling marriages, because I call the pandemic the great revealer. It reveals so many things for so many of us, including fractures, right? You remember, not just children wanted to go to school, but wives wanted to go to work, husband wanted to not be home, because being home would have been traumatic and problematic. And so what that did, it has exacerbated the violence. And that continues. You see what we see now? Is frustration. And when we rush in there to put them in boot camp, to bring the police into this, we're creating even more frustration. Pause, Trinidad and Tobago. Let us talk to them children, them.
That was going to be my next question, because I'm feeling like no one is talking to the children to find out what's going on.
Kimberly, you are so right. It pains me. That is why I'm saying we supposed to be using the panchayat system in our schools right now. We're supposed to be having the restorative circles, using mindfulness and meditation. We need to be listening to them children, not rushing in to do 1 and 1 is 2 and 5 and 5 is 6. Children have gone to preschool and have never seen a school or students. This 2 months should be used to really help and talk and listen. Them children went through real stress at home for the last 2 years on so many levels, and nobody's listening to their cry, but we are reacting to what we see, as opposed to listening to what is going on. And once we begin to listen to them, not from a punitive perspective, but a loving, developmental perspective, we will recognize that them children will boil down. But right now they're lashing out because they're frustrated. They don't know where to go, who to turn to. And everybody's exam, school. And we're not paying attention to the real questions. Let us ask the correct questions. And I'm saying once we begin to do these things, this fighting will be a thing of the past. Fighting is a reaction to something. What is this something that we are reacting to?
Now, Mr. Benjamin, you would have seen I spoke to Inspector Lewis before, and I asked her if a police officer can, arrest a child, and she said yes. And I think she gave the age group of 7 where, they can be arrested and stuff. But there's something called the judge's rule. How does that factor into, these new community police we're going to be seeing in the schools and, possibly arresting children?
No, police has always been part of the school system. And I made a statement on Facebook, and that was exactly, I said, I pray that they're following the judge's rule, because we have to protect our children. And so just quickly, you can't arrest a child in a school and put that child in handcuffs. You cannot come in a school in uniform and put a child in a marked vehicle. Those are things that people need to understand. And if you don't understand it, Google the judge's rule. It talks about the rules of engagement with children and young people in schools. And I believe that while the police and all of these other agencies are getting involved, we have to operate understanding that children too has rights. And we must protect their right. It is not just fancy to sign as a signatory to the Convention for the Rights of the Child, but it is also to practice that. And if we begin to practice that, the judge's rule and all these other things, we will move children and families further along. And so it is critical for us, as we wrap our head around what a lot of people seem to be excited about, we do it in a way that protects the rights of a child, but also develop that child and develop their families.
One of the arguments as well, Mr. Benjamin, is the fact that, children, the music that they're listening to and the things that they're exposed to could be a cause for what we're seeing now. That's like an argument with all psychologists. How true or wrong is that?
From my perspective and from research, that is a myth, right? Because the amount of people who listen to all kind of music, we will have tyranny and chaos in the world, right? People talk about video games and things. While I understand that there might be 1 or 2 outliers, statistically, if children who listen to this music in the majority were to react or respond to a video game or to music, what kind of country what kind of world we will be living in? I don't hold true to that statement at all.
Mr. Benjamin, let me thank you so much for coming. Any final thoughts before we close?
Listen to the children. Listen, the voice of the children. That is critical. And until we do that, we'll be spinning. Thank you for having me.
Mr.
Happy
Benjamin.
birthday, mother.
Of course, happy birthday, mommy, from all of us at the Now Morning Show. That was Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin, who is a clinical therapist and a clinical traumatologist, just unpacking what we've been seeing these last few days with the violence in our schools.